case against education, which you are now going to hear about. Bryan Caplan.
Thank you. So just for background, this is indeed a book that I am writing as we speak. This means that I really appreciate any feedback that I can get, as well as any insight into your own education, because every one of you is an expert on this topic. Every one of you has spent at least 10 years in this industry. So I like to tell people, education is not like offshore oil drilling, where one person in 10,000 actually knows something about it. Everyone who grows up in a modern society has to stick in classes for years, much like this one, except the other ones. This one you can leave. The other ones you can look at. All right. So now, education is one of what I call the holy trinity of products that everyone is supposed to want more and better of. So the other two are healthcare and the environment. No politician in his right mind would get in front of an American audience and say, we need to stop wasting money on education, stop wasting money on healthcare, stop wasting money on the environment. These are the kinds of things where, almost by definition, you're supposed to want more and better. And any argument about the subject has to be framed in terms of how will this give us more and better education than we've already got. Now, education is also a rare example of an issue where economists and the public see eye to eye. So in the Method of Rational Voter, I talked about all the ways that economists and the public don't see eye to eye. This is actually a rare area where economists are really as gung-ho about education as the general public. Now, if you were to ask economists why they're so gung-ho, most of what they would say is, look, we've done these rate of return to education calculations, and we found that education pays a very handsome return. And for economists, they then are very quick to leap to the conclusion, this shows that education builds human capital. Just like going and building a factory builds physical capital, sitting in the classroom, lecturing for us, or talking about something builds your human capital. It teaches you how to do your job better. And furthermore, these rate of return calculations that economists have done in thousands of papers don't even count, generally, the positive externalities, the side effects, beneficial side effects of education that economists are usually convinced education must have. Now, this brings us to the big puzzle, which is the motivation for the whole book. When you actually experience education, as everyone in this room has, it's hard not to notice that most classes teach no job skills whatsoever. Most classes that you're in do not teach you something for which there is gainful employment, or at least is extremely unlikely. Yes, if you take a history class, you can become gainfully employed as an historian, although that is extremely rare. Or, of course, as a teacher of history. After you got those two jobs, then that's pretty much it. There are very few jobs in the modern economy that use knowledge of history. The same goes for most of the subjects that you are compelled to study over the course of 13 or 17 or 21 years. Most of the stuff you study is not stuff that you ever are going to use again. So think about what fraction of U.S. jobs ever use knowledge of history. Very rare. Higher mathematics. I had a Russian colleague, and I say, you know, Ilya, most American jobs don't use any knowledge of calculus. So, well, you mean calculus is very useful? Well, it's very useful for a small number of occupations that hardly anybody does. Not very useful in all the other ones. Credentialism, like with music. Yeah, so my kids have to spend like 1/6 of their time on music. They hate this music. It is ruining any love of music that they would ever develop because they are being cajoled into doing it. And if you were saying, like, why do they need to study music for their future? I could not explain what the answer is. Right? Or art. Why do people have to learn to draw? How many jobs are there for drawing? Right? Or Shakespeare. Learning the English language has not been spoken for several hundred years. Right? Or foreign languages in the United States. Learning English in many foreign countries opens doors. Learning high school languages does not open doors to Americans. For the obvious reason that high school, so not only are there very few jobs that require knowledge of foreign languages in the U.S., but usually they are filled by immigrants who actually speak the language, rather than Americans who stumble through a few semesters barely knowing anything. Or how about Latin? So Latin has revived. So this is a language that is a dead language. It has been dead for over 1,000 years, and yet once again people are studying this. And they are applying to college saying, I'm a state Latin champion. Right. Now, you may remember going through school, there every now and then there's a smart aleck in the back of the room. There could be a smart aleck back of this room. Saying, what in the world does this have to do with real life? Remember being in trigonometry. What does trigonometry have to do with real life? And the teacher gives a very condescending, oh, one day you'll see. So have you seen the use of trigonometry? There may be a few of you who are engineers or architects who actually use trigonometry. The rest of us do not. Right, now this seems awfully strange because on the one hand, you've got employers paying a large premium to people. On the other hand, they're paying the premium because they have studied subjects that are unrelated to their work for the most part. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that no subject you learn in school has any real-world value. So reading, writing, arithmetic, real-world value. But that is just a tiny fraction of the stuff that you actually have to learn in school, the stuff that you have to demonstrate knowledge of in order to get your credentials. Which brings us to the signaling explanation, which is the heart of my book. It is easy to explain all the facts simultaneously using what economists call the signaling model of education. So the main idea is that the signaling model is this. A lot of schooling does not raise your productivity. Rather, you are jumping through hoops to show off your favorable characteristics of the job market. Favorable characteristics like your IQ, like your work ethic, and also, very importantly, your conformity. Are you a worker bee who will submit to authority and try to do a really good job on something that does not make a lot of sense to you? Will you struggle to have excellent performance when someone tells you, this is your job, do it, and you say, but I think, you're not paid to think. Well, you're paid to think about the exact thing I tell you to think about, but not to question the validity of the goal. And of course, if you were hiring people, if you want someone who's smart, but you want someone who is smart in your service, not someone who is smart in their own service, where they cause trouble and say, well, what would Kant say about this? Another way of thinking about it is this. There are two very different ways that you can raise the value of a gem. One of them is to cut it, so that you actually make it into a better gem. This is the standard human capital theory of education. The other way that you can greatly raise the value of a gem, though, is just to hand it to an appraiser, and he looks at it through his monocle, and then he says, oh, this is a wonderful gem. Puts a sticker on it, grade AAA. Both of those things can raise the value of the gem, but they're very different kinds of actions. One of them is actually changing the product. The other one is simply certifying the product. Right, now, the key assumptions of the signaling model. First of all, you need to have some hard-to-observe differences. You can't just be able to look at people and know who the good workers and who the bad workers are. It has to require some effort on your part, which seems to make a great deal of sense, especially if you realize how many applications employers typically get for any kind of decent job. Very standard for employers to get 100 or 200 applications for an entry-level position requiring a BA. So given that they are getting this giant stack of applications, what do you think they're doing? You think that they're carefully reading every single application? No, they are looking for reasons to say no. That's what anybody would do under these circumstances. Look for reasons to say no. We don't have time to give everyone a fair shake. Right? We don't have time to judge everyone as an individual. So what are we going to do? We're going to judge them as categories. We're going to use stereotypes, including the stereotype that college graduates are better workers on average than non-college graduates, and as well as other stereotypes about what majors are better than what majors are better workers than other majors, what schools are better than other schools, and so on. Right, so you've got hard to observe differences. Secondly, you need the differences to correlate with the cost of some observable activities. There's got to be something that you can do that employers can see that is easier to do if you're a good worker than if you're a bad worker. For example, good students generally finish their bachelor's degree in 4 years. Weaker students usually take about 6. So, just in terms of time and tuition alone, it is cheaper for a good student to go to school. Right? And on top of it, or cheaper for them to get a degree, and of course on top of this, let's see, what's he going to say? Oh yes, so on top of this, a general psychological principle, which I have been checking out, is people generally don't like doing things where people tell them they're failures and they're not failures. So, the psychological cost of a bad student finishing a degree is probably harder because they are not getting the kind of praise and thumbs up and pats on the head that you guys are used to getting. You just think about how miserable it must be to be a C student. What is their life like from kindergarten through graduating from college? Basically constantly being told you need to improve. No one ever saying you're awesome the way you are. And must get pretty depressing. Right, so the differences between workers have to correlate with the cost of some observable activity. And then secondly, these higher productivity workers must have lower costs of performing the observable activity. So now in signaling models, the market rewards people who show their stuff, even if the display itself is wasteful. So even if your employer doesn't really care whether you know Aristotle, the fact that you are either are or not one Aristotle class short of graduation conveys some information to your employer. So what is an employer to think if they see you are one Aristotle class short of graduation? They could say, well, this job doesn't use Aristotle, so who cares, we'll hire you. But many employers will say, wait a second, what kind of person can't just buckle down and finish that last stupid class? What is wrong with this person? Does this person have a problem with authority? Are they lazy? Do they have some other issue? Whatever it is, many employers are nervous about hiring someone, even though the class itself is plainly irrelevant to anything you do. Right now, part of the beauty of the signaling model is it works even if students, workers, and employers don't understand it. All you really need to know is, if you're a student, is I get a whole bunch of education, and then I get a better job in graduation. Why do employers care that you have a bachelor's degree in political science? you're not going to be a political scientist. You know, like very often you're just getting hired for any old office job, and yet they say, well, you have a bachelor's degree, good enough. And anyway, so, well, political science degrees don't pay. Actually, they don't pay quite as well. They pay a bit less than average, but still, even if you adjust for the greater abilities of college graduates, it looks like people with a bachelor's degree in political science earn about 35% more money than otherwise identical people who didn't go to college at all. So 35% is not enormous, but it's certainly something. It's pretty good. All right, so students don't need to understand. All a student needs to know is what classes do I have to take to get a better job. Workers similarly don't need to ask. They don't need to say, why do employers care if I go back to school? All they need to know is that without the degrees, they cannot get promoted or considered for better jobs. I actually had a student in my labor economics class who had previously run several businesses. And his friends said, apparently, I didn't want to ask, apparently each of the businesses failed, but for a while they were doing well. And he had a friend who wanted to get him a job in his office, and the boss said, well, we can't hire him until he's a college degree. So here's a guy who actually successfully run multiple businesses for a while, sitting in my class, learning stuff he's never going to need to know again. And then I teach him a signaling model. He's like, so that's why I have to be here. I have to be here because I have to go and signal that I'm willing to jump through these meaningless hoops in order to get this job at the end. Right, and finally, employers don't need to have some big theory about why educated workers are better workers. All they need to know is when I'm more open-minded and I consider people without the traditional credentials, I get burned. I go and hire people, invest resources in them, and then either they don't work out or they quit on me, so on. Right, now, what is wrong with education according to the signaling model? Well, if all you're interested in is planning your career, then the signaling model is really not very important. Right? It doesn't really matter why education raises your income, it just matters that it does. But if you're interested in education policy, the signaling model and the human capital model give very different stories about what desirable policy is. And who really cares if education builds human capital or just signals human capital? Well, in signaling models, education actually has a negative externality. Right? You know, when you get more education, you're actually doing something to other people that makes the world worse. Right? And what is that thing? You are making them look bad relative to you. Right? Even though the underlying scale has not changed. It is very much like rent seeking, it's redistribution. You are trying to pull yourself out of the pile, so you get noticed by employers. But of course, if you get noticed, then there's some other person who would have been noticed instead who is not getting the job as a result. Right? So a good way of thinking about it is classic concert analogy. So suppose everyone here is sitting down in a concert and one person wants to see better. What can the one person do in order to see better? Stand up. It therefore follows, as night does day, that if everyone stands up, everyone can see better, right? No, wrong. Of course not. Because when you stand up, you are improving your view by hurting the views of other people. That's what actually is going on when you stand up in order to see better. And in the signaling model, it is the same idea. When you go and get a fancy degree, you are making other people look bad by comparison. Right now, the human capital model is a different story because in the human capital model, you go and you acquire additional skills. You then produce the extra stuff that you get to consume. So in human capital, you go to school, you learn how to do more stuff. Then you go into the world, you produce more stuff, you get paid based upon the stuff you produced. In the human capital story, it is not redistribution. You are getting paid more because you are producing more stuff. In the signaling model, however, you are getting paid more because you have convinced employers that you're producing more stuff, which is a very different thing. Right, so these negative externalities can balance out any positive externalities or even imply that government is subsidizing waste. In my book, I do a number of calculations saying that probably the signaling share of education is about 80%. And I know that's an extreme claim, but I defend it through multiple different angles. But even as 50%, this more than wipes out even very optimistic stories about all the positive wonder that education provides to the world. Or another way of thinking about it, economists often distinguish between the social return and the private return. The signaling and the human capital models both say that education is a private return. It pays the person who does it. Where they disagree is on the social return. Does it reward society? So the human capital model, society can get rich by having everyone get a lot of education, so everyone is a good worker. In the signaling model, however, everyone can't get rich by having everyone get a lot of education. In the same way that everyone can't be number one. Everyone cannot be in the top 25%. So when you have a lot of people getting a lot of extra education, each of them individually can be improving their prospects, but if it does not actually enhance your ability to do stuff, then you are increasing your income at the expense of other people. An important difference between the signaling story and a much more popular story about higher education nowadays, the popular story is something called the education bubble, which you've all probably heard about. It's the idea that we've been pouring all this money in education, everyone thinks it's great, but it's not great and it's going to collapse. So it's an interesting story. It is striking, though, that it hasn't collapsed over the last 1,000 years. It's unclear that education was ever more practical or relevant than it is today. You can go and look at centuries where all the college graduate students, or all the college students learned was Greek, Latin, and theology. And yet, it continued on for many centuries and seemed to actually have some economic reward. Signaling model can explain that, but it's much harder for human capital to do. So the signaling model, so the education bubble makes it sound like it's a crummy system, but it's on the edge of collapse, so get ready, brace yourself. The signaling model has a very different story. It says that the status quo is stable waste. Right? As long as government keeps throwing $1 trillion per year at all forms of education, it is not going to collapse. It's just going to persist. Right? Maybe there is some room, some niche for online education. I have some colleagues who are doing online education. Like I say, from everything I've seen right now, online education is not a substitute for getting a degree, it's a substitute for blogs. Like rather than going and reading a blog, you may watch an online lecture. It's not something that you can get a job with. You can always say, watch 20 Learn Liberty videos, so maybe a digesting thing, but maybe if you work for Learn Liberty, then watching a bunch of Learn Liberty videos will have to get a job at Learn Liberty. But for most jobs, employers don't care about this stuff. You could spend 5 hours every day watching online videos, and yet what credit will the labor market give you for that? Probably none. Right? Whereas you go and do some stupid degree, just go through the motions, get good grades, graduate on time, and employers will be interested in you. Right now, with apologies to Jeff Foxworthy, these are a bunch of arguments based upon what I believe is your own first-hand experience, convince you that you have in fact been signaling for your entire educational life. Right, so you might be signaling if you bother to enroll or pay tuition. How so? Well, right now I can vouch that if you think that Princeton is the best education in the country, you can go to Princeton right now for free. Just move to the town and start attending classes. It is extremely unlikely anyone will ever ask to see your ID, anyone will ever ask to card you, and based upon almost every professor I've known, except for 2 oddballs, almost like, oh, if you were to go to the professor and say, I'm not taking enrolled, but I'm really interested in the subject, most professors will get a look like, someone wants to hear me talk about something. This is the first time this never happened. That is a typical reaction from professors. So like, if you just want to go to Princeton and get a Princeton education, you don't need to enroll, you don't need to apply, you don't need to pay tuition, just start attending classes, learn whatever you want. There's just one little problem. At the end of 4 years, you will not have a degree. There will be no record you were ever there. And if you could either have the Princeton degree without any of the education, or the Princeton education without the degree, which one would you rather have? Human capital says you should want the education and not the degree. Signaling says that you want the degree over the education. Another piece of evidence that you might be signaling. If you worry about failing the final exam and not subsequently forgetting what you learned. So the whole idea of human capital is employers pay you for what you can do right now. Employers don't pay you for what you knew 20 years ago, they pay you for what you know today. So, now how often have you taken a class, done well in the final exam, and then forgotten the material? Yes, it happens to everyone. You will notice employers very rarely quiz you to find out, well, how much do you really remember of your medieval history? They couldn't care less. But if you had simply failed the class or never taken the class, even though you are, in terms of what you know, identical to a person who got an A and then forgot it, the labor market treats you very differently. Why? Because of the signal that you sent. When you get an F in a class, that sends a signal that you were either not so smart, or lazy, or defiant, some issue. Whereas if you got an A and then forgot all the material, it just shows that you don't have photographic memory. But who does? Right. Another example. You might be signaling if you don't think cheating is only cheating yourself. So in the human capital model, when you cheat, you are paying your school for nothing. You're paying your school so that you can go and not really learn the material, you get a mark, but you haven't actually acquired the skills. What's the point? Well, in human capital terms, there is no point to that. But in the signaling model, on the other hand, there's a very clear point. When a person who doesn't know the material gets an A, who have they made look bad by comparison? Whose educational achievements have they devalued by getting an A even though they don't know the material? Everyone else in the class. Everyone else in the university. Your school is known as a diploma mill. It ruins the value of the degree, or reduces the value of the degree for everyone there. So one person who cheats is moving up the rankings themselves while making everybody else look bad. So cheating is not just cheating yourself. You are actually cheating the other students who had to work for their signal. You might be signaling if you seek out easy A's. Like, think about this. There are professors who are hard graders but teach a lot of material. And there's other professors who are easy graders who don't teach a lot of material. Which one do college students almost always prefer? They prefer the easy teachers, don't teach very much, but they give you an easy A. And of course, you want to have classes that sound hard, so real analysis sounds a lot better than teaching complex studies. But you can find the easiest teacher of real analysis in the world who gives A's to everybody. Great. Then later, oh my God, he's got an A in real analysis. That's hard in most places. You don't know, it's not how I can get that. Right, over, here's the last one, relevant to all the snow days we've been having. You might be signaling if you rejoice when teachers cancel class. In terms of the human capital model, this is incomprehensible. This is someone saying, look, you know how you gave me all this tuition money so I can invest in your skills and turn you into great workers? Right. Well, tell you what, I'm not going to give you the skills and I'm going to keep your money. Haha. That is what it would be in the human capital stories. You pay someone to invest in you, they don't do it. In reality, however, students generally are really happy when the class is canceled. And I can ask my sons when they were 9 years old, why is it you don't want to miss a day of school when it's being held, but you love it when a day is canceled? Well, we don't look worse we don't look any worse relative to anybody else. It doesn't hurt our grades. In other words, our ranking in the hierarchy stays the same if everybody doesn't go. That is just what signaling says. Now let me go over a bunch of the most popular objections. So signaling models are widely dismissed on what I call a priori grounds. So these are not arguments about the facts, because almost everyone I've ever talked to admits that my facts sound true. They're truthy at least. I've never met anyone who just says, the way you're describing school bears no resemblance to my first-hand experience. In fact, there's one well-known economist, who will remain nameless, who, in his writings, is very critical of the signaling model and says that there's really nothing to it. And yet, I was asking him about some apprenticeship that he did when he was in a European country, which will also remain nameless. And I said, so were you ever tempted to just continue in this banking apprenticeship in order to and then rise there? He said, no, you can't actually get advanced without getting a college degree. Aha! And even he was embarrassed when he said that. So these are some of the main objections saying, do not believe your eyes, what appears to be true cannot be true. So here's one. If the signaling model were true, we would just do IQ tests instead. Right, sounds interesting. The main problem is that education signals more than just IQ. Right, education also signals work ethic, signals conformity. Does anyone here have a friend who had great SAT scores but who didn't go to college or dropped out? Right, so somebody like that. What is their problem? What is your friend's problem? Yes, lazy, nonconformist. Yeah, so I had a friend like this who was absolutely brilliant computer programmer, and yet he failed peace and conflict studies. Why? Because he refused to even go to the final exam. Because he thought the class was stupid. Right, so as you can imagine, while on the basis of his computer programming he was able to get a number of jobs, the employers almost always regretted it, because he would tell them that they were stupid and that their ideas were stupid, and he was going to do whatever he wanted to do. And employees who have that attitude are not really good employees. So saying we would just do IQ tests instead is not a solution if there are multiple things that you are trying to signal, and especially if showing strength in just one area in an unconventional way suggests an offsetting weakness. So having great IQ scores in our society without having any formal credentials is a pretty strong sign that you are a very smart person who has personality issues. Again, by the way, I love people like this. There's many of my best friends, but I don't want to. Now, just one example, Nobel laureate James Heckman just has a new book out on the GED, and the punchline is that people who pass the GED are quite a bit smarter than other high school dropouts, but they barely make any more money. And his story, which he then backs up in a number of ways, is that GEDs are smart, but he puts it this way: they're smart but lacking in character. So he's Nobel laureate, so he can pen people very quickly. All right, another common a priori objection. Say, employers know true productivity after a few months, so there's no way that this story can work. Now, first of all, as I pursued the book, I've read a lot about how quickly do employers learn how good their workers are. Most people say it's quite a long enough 3 months. The 3 months figure comes from Tyler Cowen and Gary Becker. Well, Tyler actually does hire and fire people, so he knows more about this than he has better first-hand experience than me. But anyway, suppose it really is true that you know a worker's true productivity after 3 months. This still does not unseat the signaling model. Why? Well, what has to happen before an employer can observe your work for 3 months? You must be hired. What has to happen before you can be hired? You must be interviewed. What has to happen before you can be interviewed? Your resume must not be thrown in the trash immediately. So, it can very well be that the degree is necessary to get your foot in the door, and getting your foot in the door, if it is the only way to advance, people may be willing to pay years of their lives and tens of thousands of dollars in order to do this. Think about all the actors hanging around Hollywood trying to get discovered. They may spend 10 years of their life trying to get their foot in the door. The idea that if there's an enormous reward to getting past a certain threshold, that people will not go and pour a ton of resources into it is just wrong. Another story says, look, there has to be a cheaper way. It can't really be that that spending years of your life doing all this stupid stuff is the cheapest way of doing it. Here I've got two answers. First of all, of course, government pours $1 trillion every year on traditional education. So this does stack the deck against alternatives, certainly. There are a lot of other ways that people might be able to prove themselves to employers if there weren't $1 trillion on the side of the status quo. $1 trillion per year. That's a lot of money. Right? But in any case, I'll say, look, not only does there not have to be a cheaper way, there's actually an inconsistency between the signaling model and signaling being cheap. Consider this. Suppose that you suddenly discovered that diamonds, a new chemical process came along to make diamonds as cheaply as plastic. How long would it take before no one ever gave a diamond engagement ring ever again? A day. All diamond engagement rings would be off the table. Why? Because that engagement ring no longer shows commitment because it now costs 10 cents. So if diamonds became super cheap, what would happen? People would have to go and find some other more really expensive material, or they might give rings that were like as big as a table. But it has to be an expensive signal, because if it was not expensive, everyone will do it, and if everyone does it, it doesn't show anything. Another story that many economists like is they look. Well, sure, you don't use the stuff that you learn in school, but you learn how to learn in school. Very popular story. However, there is an entire field that studies the question of learning how to learn. It starts with a P. What's that subject?
Pedagogy.
Psychology. A subject that economists notoriously like to ignore. So I have not ignored it. There is 100-year literature on the question of learning how to learn, where psychologists who come to the issue being very optimistic and thinking that, of course, there's a lot of learning how to learn, after 10 or 20 years of doing research say, look, I just can't find much evidence at all. Learning turns out to be highly specific, at best. Most of the time you teach people stuff and they forget it. But in general, if you teach people something, they are very bad at applying it to anything outside of the narrow area where they learn it. So, again, it's 100-year literature, but in the book I try to give a good 10-page overview of everything that's known. I mean, it's amazing to me how economists will retreat to the story without ever bothering to look at any of the evidence on it. It really just doesn't really hold up. Now, last story, which I think there is something to it, says, look, what education does is it builds character. You sit here suffering for many years and you're being bored out of your mind, obeying your teachers, and this turns you into a good worker bee, or at least a better worker bee. And then employers very understandably want to hire you because, like a wild horse, you've been broken. All right. I think that there is, this is a reasonable story for K-12 education. It doesn't seem like a reasonable story for modern college because modern college is so easy. So the amount of time that college students spend on all academic endeavors is down to about 25 hours a week. So basically college is the easiest time in your life that you're ever going to have probably. So if anything, it seems like it is ruining people's work ethics by giving them a very light workload and allowing them to choose majors where they get very little negative feedback and everyone holds their hand. This is not what the real world is. The real world will give you negative feedback and will make you work more than 25 hours a week. Right? But in any case, what I'll say is, it's believable that some education does mold you in order to be a better worker bee, but the question is how much. So there is a lot of effort that's been made to see how much does a year of job experience improve your productivity. The usual answer there is about 2 or 3% per year. Say it is very hard to believe that school prepares people better to be workers than work itself, because school and work are different. So I'd say at an absolute maximum, school is as good at molding character as work, and from work we know it's something like 2 to 3% per year, which is just a tiny fraction of the total character formation. So character formation probably got wrong, but couldn't explain more than a smidge. So, signaling explains some otherwise very puzzling facts, and these a priori objections only apply to the most simple-minded versions of theory, which I find enormously frustrating. How often when I argue with economists, they just repeat one of these 5 stories, or even worse, they'll say, "Look, Caplan says it's 100% signaling." I never said 100% signaling. I say a lot of it's signaling. I never deny that reading and writing are useful job skills. What I said is there's a lot of what you do in school that is not useful job skills, and that is the mystery that most economists are brushing under the rug. Right now, why do I bring this to Students for Liberty? Well, most libertarian education policy analysts essentially buy into this Trinity story. They buy into the idea that, of course, we want education to be, we want more and better education. Education is a wonderful, outstanding, fantastic thing. And the market will give you more of it, and the market will give you more and better education. Now, this seems like a very odd argument to make. Just think about this. Right now, governments around the country heavily subsidize sports stadiums. very heavily subsidized. Is it a sensible libertarian argument to say, if government stopped subsidizing sports stadiums, we'd have way more and way better sports stadiums? And that's pretty crazy. Government is pouring a ton of money making stadiums that would be unprofitable without the subsidies profitable. I say the same thing goes for education. Government is pumping up this industry despite all its problems, and the first thing for libertarians to say is cut the subsidies. Cut the subsidies, and if it is not possible for schools and colleges to pass the market test, then we would be better off with fewer of them, certainly. Actually, in the book, I am going to go for broke and advocate separation of school and state, end of all the subsidies. But at the same time, I do want to appeal to more moderates. Well, maybe we should only cut education spending by 50%. Maybe, somewhere in that ballpark, an enormous amount. So what do you mean? It's definitely rhetorical. It's easy to see why most libertarian education policy people give the story about how vouchers are going to make education way better, because they are pandering to popular perception. They're pandering to the ethos of thinking that education is a special good that should not have to pass the market test. But the truth is actually more complicated. The truth, I say, is that a lot of education is genuinely socially wasteful. Government is subsidizing the waste, and rather than saying we need to somehow make it better, say we need to just make it, the first thing is to make it less. And after we see a large reduction in amount of spending, then we can talk about other improvements. Right now, since I'm in IHS, after I gave this talk, the political philosopher Jacob Levy commented that this talk was evil. And his story was, well, look at IHS. IHS is all about educating people and the love of the mind and so on. And when he said that, he crystallized something in my mind, which, well, there is a sense in which I totally agree. So, education as a merit good. Is there something intrinsically valuable to education? I actually do. And I am as highbrow, high-culture person as you were likely to meet in the United States. But I will still say that there are two crucial conditions which actual education does not meet, which strip it of any merit good status. So, the first one is the education itself is so crummy. So, most of the college classes that I had were taught so poorly, the subject matter selected so poorly, that I didn't see any point of it being taught. I don't consider it particularly valuable to teach 5 weeks on the thought of Karl Marx, who, in my mind, is just a 19th century hate monger. That's forgotten. I don't see any merit in that. He is not a thinker of originality or insight. He is an unfortunately influential person who with really essentially virtually nothing of value in his entire life's work. So part of the reason why I am not impressed with education's merit good is that the quality of most education is so low, which I will say, having gone through a whole lot of schools that are generally considered to be very good, but they didn't look good to me when I was there. They seemed very boring, poorly taught, poorly thought out. Everything from K through 12 to UC Berkeley to Princeton, I would say maybe one teacher out of 8 that I really think actually was providing this merit good. Right? And the other thing is, I don't see things as a merit good if people don't actually want to consume the merit good. So I'm a big fan of German opera, but I still wouldn't want to go and round up people from a baseball stadium and put them in the opera and saying it's good for your soul. They don't want to be there. They don't appreciate it. So it's only a merit good if the audience appreciates it. This is why IHS is one of my very favorite places in the world to teach. Because here we do teach good ideas. Ideas that are worth knowing, ideas that are worth hearing, ideas that are worth discussing, and everybody who is here wants to be here. So, to you, for us, education is merit good, but education as it really exists is not. In a way, the way that I think about it is this. It's not that I hate education. I love education too much to accept what passes as a substitute in the real world. I'll stop there, take questions now.
Publication date of your book, tentatively, and then can you talk about the process of what you really think and like to write in the book versus having to taper it down so that it's published or that it sells? Because you mentioned that. Maybe you can talk about that in not only in your work but also just in general, how that process plays out.
Sure. All right. So first question: when is it going to come out? My current date is 2017. I think it'll be done in 2016, but that's an election year, and I think election years are terrible years to release books of big ideas. You were crowded off of TV and bestseller list and everything else by election books. The book is taking quite a bit longer than I was originally hoping, but I'm not minding it because the main reason why it's taking so much time is I just keep finding more stuff to read. I'm a big believer in being genuinely knowledgeable about what I write about, and I really believe that story, you can't be a good economist if you only know economics. I really don't want to write the book as an economist. I want to write it as an economist, a psychologist, a sociologist, political theorist. I want to have all these perspectives worked in. Even if I don't actually wind up relying upon something I've read, I like to know that I've read it, so that at least I took into account when I was writing the book. So it is taking longer than I thought, but the progress is slow but steady. I just keep coming and finding an extra 1,000 pages that I really need to read before I can comfortably proceed. So this book is much more research intensive than either of my other books, which are more hermetically sealed. In terms of how much do I tone things down? Now in my books, I barely tone things down at all, actually. I generally say things exactly as I want. Part of what I want to do is to say things in a way which will be appealing to people who don't already agree with me. It's part of my philosophy about how a book should be written. If it can't appeal to someone who doesn't disagree with you to some degree, then you have not done a good job. But it's very different. When I was writing journal articles, then I often had paralysis. I'm sitting there saying, here's what I'm thinking. I can't say that and get published. Next song, man, I can't say that and get published. Next thing, can't say that and get published. In the journal articles, you're much more constrained. One of the main reasons I like writing books is that you're just able to craft a much more intellectually satisfying project. You aren't really trying to please a committee of people who are there just complaining and finding fault. You are trying to create value for readers and create a product that people really enjoy rather than something that doesn't annoy people on a bunch of busy points. I remember in my dissertation, my advisor made me add like 40 different footnotes on issues that she was the only person on earth who cared about them at all. And once I was getting ready to publish my dissertation, I went and deleted all the footnotes that she made me add. And no referee, no matter how negative they were, ever echoed any of her complaints. These were just complaints that she personally had that she wanted to foist on me for reasons best known to her. So wait back there.
I wanted to ask your opinion of something that
Can you speak up, please?
Yeah. So looking at like some data from like really starting like the 1920s through today, in the early half of the 20th century was much easier. Much easier to make a living on a lesser degree. Now you could still get a PhD in the 1900s and a master's, et cetera, et cetera. But the amount of people that had them was very small. So if you had just a high school diploma, you could basically get a job and support yourself in like the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s. Now what I see happening is a lot of the educational requirements to obtain these degrees and these diplomas, et cetera, have been relaxed so that more people can get them. It makes the schools look better. It makes the politicians running the schools look better. The bureaucrats look better. And what I noticed that causing is the inverse of what the effect is supposed to be. Is we have this conceptual idea that if people get this piece of paper, then they're more valuable in the workforce. But what I see happening is that giving these pieces of paper out, relaxing requirements, the requirements to get them is what that paper represents. Diminishing those makes the paper worth less, not the person worth more. I call it school inflation. What do you think?
Right. So there's about half of what you said is exactly right, and then the other half is mixed. So to start with, it is not true that it was easier to support yourself in 1900 than it is today, at any educational level. People were dramatically poorer at every educational level compared to today. So, the only thing you can say is that it was easy to have it was easy to have high relative status with fewer degrees in 1900, but still, like a college graduate in 1900 would have a standard of living that you would consider relatively low. So, living standards for all educational categories are way higher than they were in the past. It is true that as more people have degrees, it has devalued some of the degrees for some of the people. So, overall, on average, the college premium as well as the high school premium, like the difference in earnings between college graduates and high school graduates, between high school graduates and high school dropouts, on average, that is bigger than ever. So, it is not true that on average that these degrees pay less than they used to; they pay more. However, it is true that if you go and stop looking at averages and then look at people who go to low-ranked schools and easy majors, yes, they are generally getting very poor returns. So the average return for college and high school graduation is actually at a near its historic high. But that average does conceal a great deal of diversity. So the idea that there are people who are getting degrees that are meaningless, that is true. But the average is still quite good. Let's see, over there.
Here? Me?
Yes.
Okay. You probably don't have a sort of specific, really well-defined picture of what you would like the world of education to look like. Maybe you do. But I'm curious, can you sort of offer some thoughts on what we might see if education were much less heavily subsidized, decontrolled? I'm thinking, what would it be like? Apprenticeships, trade schools, homeschooling. What are we seeing?
Yeah, so the first thing, of course, is there would be a lawless education.
Sure.
A lot of people, and a lot of it driven by the harsh truth people can't afford the education anymore. But there is a silver lining. You can't afford it anymore. You also don't need it anymore, because a lot of other people can't afford it and no longer carries the stigma that it does today. Right now, when it's very affordable, if someone seems good, they don't have a degree, an employer can always say, well, why doesn't he have a degree? In a world where most people can't afford it, as say the 19th century, the stigma is very mild because, well, most people can't afford it, so no big surprise there. So, first thing is just the people finishing school at a much earlier age. I think that there would be quite a bit more vocational education. And furthermore, there would be, apprenticeships. I think would be a much bigger deal. And then just in general, people would just start their life at an earlier age. You go and read autobiographies of people before World War II. It's just shocking how much they lived before they were 18. Like Malcolm X, when he was at 13, already had a bunch of jobs. He worked for the railroad. He'd seen the country. A 13-year-old traveling over the country, doing different jobs. So this is something that we have lost sight of. But there is a reason why very few people do it, and that is in today's society, the stigma against people doing it is very high. But in a society with far fewer people getting the education, it would really be far less necessary. Yes, right there, please.
Time for one more question.
Yes.
So I come from New York, and anyone who knows New York, they started doing Common Core standards in our public schools. And as someone who happened to graduate before they decided to change everything up and make us all look stupid, like I see kids now going through it, and I'm like, all right, so you're trying to push something on them that they're probably not going to have a chance to really understand, and you're making teachers 10 times more frustrated trying to teach something that they don't even understand because it really, to be truthful honest, doesn't make any sense. I want to know what you think about Common Core. I want to know if you think that the government is too busy pushing standards on kids from the time that they're young to the time that they're in college that would try and make them seem like they're more educated, like they can, work in like an international atmosphere where there are kids who might be getting a completely different education or being taught the way that they're supposed to be taught or how they learn. Is it good for the government to even try and make us, try to excel from the standards that we're used to and pushing it on children that are younger?
Sure. So say is the curriculum standards that governments around the United States have are crazy. And again, a lot of the reason why you have all these ridiculous subjects that I was mentioning here is they are part of the mandated curriculum. You have to have 3 years of a foreign language in order to graduate from a California high school now, for example. Now I would say, insofar as government is spending money, I think it is better for them to spend money usefully rather than uselessly. So, a curriculum based upon helping people master reading, writing, and arithmetic. That is something where I see some value, and even if kids don't like it, at least they use it. At least it would actually help them in life. Right? Whereas the other stuff that is rammed down people's throats and they have to know and jump through the hoops in order to graduate, I think that stuff is really a giant waste of time. One of my favorite ideas I'm going to push in the book is to open up the school library so that when you are not doing an academic subject, you can go there instead of to the dumb electives that you are being corralled into. So I think about my kids and how much they prefer to go to the library and read instead of doing music or art or dance. They hate this stuff. It is humiliating to them. They don't want to do it. I totally agree with them. It's ridiculous. But I actually called up the vice principal to ask if they could be excused from dance and music. And he took my call, and he said, I'll have to get back to you. And then he came back, no, sorry, our regulations don't allow that. Every student must have at least 200 hours of music per year. All right, I'll try. So, thanks for being great.